All right, this is video notes for Module 2 about the business cycle. So the first thing that we have to talk about is the things that determine the phases of the business cycle. So there are basically three things that determine what phase you're in. So the first thing that determines the phase is the unemployment rate. So the unemployment rate is basically the percentage of the amount of people that want a job but can't find one. So what we are looking at is we're looking at those people that are actively seeking unemployment or actively seeking a job divided by the entire labor force. Now, keep in mind that those that are actively seeking a job are those that count as unemployed. Okay? So what about, for example, retirees? Do retirees count as unemployed? No, because they're not actually looking for a job. They're retired. But they also don't count as part of the labor force because they don't have a job either. Because remember, the labor force is made up of those people that have a job and those people that don't have a job but are actively looking for one. So they don't count. Okay? So they're not included in the unemployment rate. What about stay-at-home moms or dads? Do they count as unemployed? Again, no, because they are not actively looking for a job. So as a result, they're not unemployed either. Okay? Remember, unemployed, it has to be those people that are actively looking for a job, and the labor force does not include retirees, it does not include stay-at-home parents, and it does not include teenagers. The part of it is also going, you have to look at is the labor force includes those people that are over 18 that are looking for a full-time job. Okay, so if you, for example, decide that you're not going to go to college and you're looking for a job, then you would be considered unemployed. Now, can unemployment ever reach 0%? No. It can never reach 0%. You can never have 100% of the labor force employed. Part of the reason is the fact that there is always going to be people that are in flux. There's people always going to be in between jobs. For example, you may have people that move from one location to another. Or you may have, for example, there may be jobs available, but they're in fields that they're not qualified for. They don't have enough education for. So in order to be able to get that job, they have to go back and get some more training, get some more education. So that will take time. So in the meantime, yeah, they're going to be unemployed if they're continuing to look for work. Okay? So that's one of the determinants of the phases of the business cycle. The second determinant is GDP. GDP is the gross domestic product. Basically, this is how much stuff is produced in a given year. Okay? Now, we're going to talk more about GDP a little bit later as far as how GDP is actually calculated, how do you add up all that stuff, it's the value of all that stuff, but generally speaking, GDP is just looking at how much is actually produced, and we'll talk more specifics later. The third determinant of the business cycle is the inflation. So overall rise in prices. How much are prices rising from one year to the next? Now, inflation is determined by a bunch of different things, but generally speaking, what we're saying is that the value of your money has dropped. So over time, for example, these are all $20 bills here, okay? So I think you probably can't see the numbers here, but this is a grocery cart from 1972, this is a grocery cart from 1992, and this is a grocery cart from 2012, okay? What we're trying to show you is that because of inflation, because the price of everything is going up, the value of that $20 bill has gone down, and you can't buy as much stuff, right? So as a result, there's less and less stuff in that particular shopping cart. Again, we'll talk more specifics about inflation later. This is just kind of a general introduction. So the business cycle, like I said, is a result of three things: unemployment rate, the GDP, what's happening with GDP, and the inflation rate. So now we can actually talk about the business cycle. So the business cycle looks like this. It looks like a giant roller coaster. So we have the peak, a recession, and the recession goes into the trough, and then we have an expansion, and then we have another peak. Okay? So when we talk about the phases of the business cycle, I did do an activity in class, a demonstration in class, I should say, where I had students standing, kneeling, sitting, to be able to represent the phases of the business cycle. So first we started off at the peak. So the peak is up here. So in class I had a person that was standing and holding 3 signs. And I said that this person is going to be where there is very little unemployment. So most people are employed. So it's going to be very hard for companies to find workers at the peak. Okay, so you have very low unemployment at the peak. But because of that, you're producing lots and lots of stuff. So as a result, GDP is going to be very high. But because tons of people have a job, so lots of people are making good money, they're making lots of stuff, as a result, you are also going to have a lot of inflation. So there's going to be a lot of money out there, so there's going to be a lot of inflation at the peak. So in class, this is where I had people standing. Then we go through a recession. So the recession and possibly even a depression is going to be we're on the downward trend, which could also lead into the trough. Okay, so in a recession, what happens is that we're going to have the unemployment rate is going to get slightly higher, because we're going to have, it starts off with a peak where we have inflation is so high that you have people that the employers can't afford to expand anymore. So they can't afford to, for example, hire as many people. So maybe they have to let some people go. So now you have a little bit more unemployment with a recession. Because they don't have as many workers, they can't produce as much stuff. So now our GDP is going down. And because we have less people that have jobs and we have less stuff that's produced, as a result, our inflation is also going to go down because we have less money out there. So during a recession, we have unemployment rate is going up, GDP is going down, and inflation is going down as well. When we get to the trough, we've kind of bottomed out. So bottoming out is we're going to have the absolute lowest GDP. We're going to have the absolute lowest inflation, but we are going to have the absolute highest unemployment rate. Now, here's the thing: is the difference between a recession and a depression is simply going to be how long it lasts. Okay, recessions are going to be typically a lot shorter than depressions, and even that said, a lot of people will make the argument that depressions, they're not labeled depressions as often just because of the fact that that D word scares a lot of people. The most recent recession that we've experienced was back in 2007, 2008, and there was some people that were making the argument when we get into 2009 and we're not seeing a whole lot of expansion, well, maybe we're going through a depression. It was whispers, but there were some whispers. They still call it the Great Recession. They don't want to use that D word. Okay? But eventually we hit this trough and we hit this bottom, and eventually we'll start to expand again. So the expansion piece is where we start to expand, and all of a sudden we see that because of such low inflation, because it's so cheap to be able to get money, what happens is we have businesses all of a sudden that are starting to expand again, and they can afford to hire more people, so our unemployment rate goes down. All of a sudden we see that because we have we have more workers out there, we have more people that are actually being hired, and we have more people that are on the payroll, we can make more stuff. GDP goes up, okay? But because we have more workers that have more money now, all of a sudden the inflation also goes up, okay? So it's hard to be able to determine where the trough actually is, because where's the bottom? And you don't really know until after it's passed. There's still some arguments about the 2007-2008 recession as far as where the bottom was. Some people argued it was at the end of 2008. Some people argue it was in 2009. Some people even maybe say 2010. Okay, but again, you don't notice it until you've passed it. So that's part of the problem. Now, like I said, is that this is a roller coaster. So you have going through your peak, your recession, your trough, your expansion, and just going through the process. Okay, but over time, output also increases over time, which indicates economic growth. Notice this blue dotted line here. Okay, what happened is that over time, we are still going to be able to produce more stuff over time, generally speaking. This is the way it should work. Okay, so in class, for example, I demonstrated this where I had the peak, I had somebody that was standing and holding a sign that said we have very low unemployment, high GDP, and high inflation. Then I had somebody kneeling, and that was when we're going through a recession. And so at that point, we have somebody that is holding a sign that says we are having increasing unemployment, decreasing GDP, and decreasing inflation. And then I had somebody that's sitting for the trough, and that's going to be the highest unemployment, it's going to be the lowest GDP, and the lowest inflation. And then we go through a kneeling process where it's going to be expansion, and we're going through an increasing GDP, increasing inflation, and lowered unemployment. But then when I get to the peak again, this is where I can have somebody, for example, standing on a desk chair. Okay, you're standing on the desk chair. And then this recession, they'll be kneeling on the desk chair. And then they will be sitting on the desk chair. The point that I'm trying to make is that this trough, notice, is higher than this trough. So while, yes, it is the low point in that particular cycle, this is going to be a higher level of output than the previous trough. Okay, that indicates growth over time, and that's actually what should happen over time. And so if we continue on, you'll notice that this peak is higher than this peak, and so you will have a higher output than the last time you had a peak. All right, hopefully this all makes sense. Let me know if you have any questions, and we'll talk later.